All right, and we are live.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another IDA Advancing Places webinar. Today, we're going to talk about connecting with downtown neighborhoods. We're going to hear a case study today from Kansas City, Missouri, and learn some creative tools and techniques that help them to establish new relationships with their downtown neighborhoods. As always, we want to have a great discussion with our members, so please send any questions that you have during our discussion. Insert into the GoToWebinar questions pane. We also would like to hear directly from you, so please indicate when typing your questions to us if you can be unmuted so that you can pose the question directly to the panelists. Also remember, today's webinar, if you're an AICP certified planner, you can receive 1 certification maintenance credit for today's webinar. So if you want to track your webinar, go to planning.org and you'll be able to track your own credits. You know, it's always so important when we have the support of sponsors for our webinars and all the things that we do today. And we are so excited to have Jason Doyle here, who's the CEO of Gridix. Gridix is revolutionizing zoning and development capacity analysis with its patented zoning engine, providing cities with detailed zoning data for every parcel. So I'm going to give it to Jason now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carolyn. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. Thanks for having us. We're proud to sponsor IDA and all the information you guys are coming together to try and make communities better for everybody, which is ultimately our mantra. We've developed a technology approach to that. We have roots in urban planning, and ultimately our mission is to really help build better cities and communities through data-driven and technology tools that we are now arming cities and counties with. We've been around for 6 years and spent the first few years really honing in our patented zoning engine, which effectively allows us to do 3D scenario analysis at a robust level, but also just ultimately calculate the development capacity for every parcel in a city, which is allowing us to give cities and counties a new approach to zoning information, which, as you all probably know, is oftentimes complex and you know, not that easy to understand. We sell our information platform. Some of the cities that use us, because we got our start in the city of Miami, is where one of our offices is. So the city of Miami was our first customer, and we've since added numerous customers in South Florida and are now seeing nice traction and adoption of our platform. When we do that, when we work with a city, we've also oftentimes gotten pulled in to work with downtown development authority groups, as well as capital improvement projects, things like that, to do 3D scenario analysis of corridor studies, things that really can help you understand your capacity within a given area according to zoning. So we encourage you to check us out at gridix.com. If you have any projects that you think kind of fit within a manner in which we can help, please don't hesitate to reach out and have a wonderful webinar. And thank you for having us.
Again, thank you so much, Jason. Great work that you're doing and really important to our industry. So thank you so much. So today, now we've got 3 amazing panelists. I've had a great opportunity to get to know them. And we're just gonna say hello at first and check everybody's microphones and everything. So we have Bill Dietrich, who's the president and CEO of the Downtown Council of Kansas City. How are you doing today, Bill?
Morning, Carolyn. I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Great, great. You're coming in loud and clear. And next we have Ann Holliday, Vice President, Strategic Initiatives, Downtown Council of Kansas City. How are you doing today, Ann?
I'm great, Carolyn. So glad to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Loud and clear. And then we have Jamila Jordan, which I've gotten to work with over the past few years as well. She's the director of the Equity Studio for MIG. And how are you doing today, Jamila?
I'm doing great, Carolyn. Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to be with all of you.
Excellent, excellent. Loud and clear. Everybody's looking great. We're going to have some fun today and really talk about an amazing project that you're working on in Kansas City. So first I'm going to introduce Jamila Jordan. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about her. She is an accomplished planner and public outreach specialist whose projects often involve complex issues associated with community development, transportation, public health, and social welfare. Building on her grassroots experiences, Jamila honed her ability to engage and connect with people of different backgrounds and cultures, which grounds her work as a facilitator and project manager to foster collaboration and inclusive engagement. Her passion for advancing equity is historically marginalized in historically marginalized communities, fuels and informs her creative in designing and implementing plans that build consensus, capacity, and a future vision. And then next, we're going to hear from, after Jamila, we'll hear from Bill Dietrich, again, who is the president and CEO of the Downtown Council of Kansas City. He's facilitated the restoration of the historic Central Library, developed a multi-services homeless day shelter, provided organizational leadership in the development of the downtown streetcar, and is currently providing development support for the proposed downtown YMCA and Crossroads Advocacy Academy High School. Whoa, talk about words. Bill has also served as the Chief Administrative Officer of the Downtown Community Improvement District, the River Market Community Improvement District, as well as the Innovative Startup Business Grant Competition, Launch KC. Good morning, Bill. Then we have Ann Holliday as the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives with the Downtown Council and the Director of Art in the Loop Foundation. Ann has worked for the Downtown Council for over 20 years, and as Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, she is the lead staff person for the Imagine Downtown KC 2030 planning process, and also coordinates research on policy issues, produces the annual luncheon, and manages administration of the Art in the Loop Foundation, whose goal is to engage artists in the redevelopment of downtown Kansas City. So welcome to all three of you. Quite impressive panel today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jamila to start it off.
Great. Thanks so much, Carolyn. So hoping everyone can see my screen here. Great.
We're good.
Excellent. So again, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with all of you today. Really excited about today's session. My name is Jamila Jordan, and as Carolyn mentioned, I'm the director of the Equity Studio at MIG, which is a mission-driven planning and community engagement firm. Our organization has designed and led numerous downtown planning processes that result in equitable growth and sustainable development. Today, I'm going to share just some of our experiences and our approaches to engaging the adjacent and surrounding communities in downtown planning. So what we know to be true is that great downtowns, they bring people together. They're vibrant, connected, and inclusive. They offer a wide range of services and amenities to community members. And downtowns really create an experience of togetherness and often provide cultural assets and entertainment opportunities that really bring communities to life, as you can see here. They also bring in capital and investment that's really important for revitalizing cities and urban cores. And naturally, the communities that surround downtowns want to benefit from these various amenities, from this investment, from this capital. They want to leverage the economic and social opportunities that downtowns can bring. But many place management organizations and downtown practitioners often inherit a complicated relationship with the neighborhoods adjacent to the downtown core. These neighborhoods may be separated from downtown by historic and political barriers, and that could include racist and exclusionary policies and practices over years of time, decades of broken economic development promises. So there's a real need to address the legacy of redlining and segregation and the impacts of urban renewal, also known as Negro removal from many people's vantage points, that still plagues so many cities to this day. So it's understandable that communities are suspicious of downtown planning efforts. And this image, as you can see here, includes that it's not just about revitalization. Sometimes it feels like gentrification to many community members. People are concerned about being displaced. And as you can see in this image here, this woman is asking, now that the neighborhood is nice, why do I have to move? So these are some of the things that we find ourselves up against as we think about how to engage these surrounding communities in downtown planning. And it's really important for us to reimagine downtown planning, to be inclusive of these surrounding communities, to reimagine inclusive urban spaces, and dismantling the legacy of racist planning, housing, and infrastructure policies. And one of the ways that we can do this, everyone, is by meaningfully engaging communities, partnering with residents, with neighbors, with businesses, and advocates to create downtowns that really benefit everyone. That's our goal. A healthy, thriving downtown in which everyone can live their best lives. And through these processes, we're able to build community wealth, inclusion, and accessibility. And so I want to share with you just a couple of principles, a couple of strategies that we've used to great success in some of our planning efforts that really set the stage for equitable engagement. And this inclusion, this idea of inclusion of not only the downtown core, but the adjacent neighborhoods. So one thing that's very much important is acknowledging the past in order to build the future. I touched already on the legacy of redlining, for example, which still continues to plague our cities. And it's important for us to understand that there may be some bitterness when we engage community members. They may still feel the effects of past growth policies, segregation by wealth, segregation by race and ethnicity. You can still see the tracks of poverty that exist based on those centuries ago of redlining that existed. These are some of the things that we have to confront. And I was really inspired by Amanda Gorman, who delivered one of the poems at the national inauguration of President Joe Biden. And she says, "For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us." So it's important to acknowledge the past, to build with it, to reckon with it, but also to move forward in a future that everyone can live their best lives. And at the same time, or while we're acknowledging that history, I think it's also important to deal with the present and to recognize that there may be current struggles within your community that you have to grapple with, that you have to take into account as you go into these downtown planning efforts. And just this past year's racial justice protests have brought these long simmering tensions swiftly back to the surface for everyone. So these are some things that we have to contend with, the social and historical aspects of planning and how it impacts us today. As you can see, the Black Lives Matter movement was certainly has continued to play a significant role in the planning efforts of many downtown communities, thinking through how can we more equitably engage and build capital within these communities that have often been neglected. I want to give you an example of some of our work recently in Charlotte. And this is a project that MIG has been a part of recently. We partner with the city of Charlotte to lead their comprehensive planning effort. It was also known as the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Proud to say that it was just adopted and approved by City Council. And what this is, it was a planning process that really set out to engage community members around how do they want Charlotte to grow over the next 20 years? How do they want it to develop? How can we address some of the mistakes and some of the historic wrongs of the past? And we really wanted to be intentional about building relationships with community members, repairing that trust. And so some of the things that we did is we worked hand in hand with nonprofits, with community-based organizations, with churches and faith-based institutions, for example, and they became ambassadors for the project for us. They went out and engaged their constituencies. So we were able to leverage some of their social capital and build on those relationships in order to start again, to start anew with many of these communities. We also were really intentional about taking an asset-based approach. So as opposed to thinking about what's wrong with some of these communities, what are some of the problems and the challenges, we really wanted to start from an asset, strength-based approach. So what do you love about your community? How can you envision yourself being more inclusive with the downtown core, for example? And these are things that we were able to surface due in large part to our relationships with the ambassadors. In addition to that, everyone, it's so important for us to think about how can we engage those most impacted by some of these planning processes and to challenge the status quo in terms of the types of questions that we ask. So it's important for us to think about, what are some of the impacts of our planning decisions and processes, for example. And when we went out into the community, we had to contend with COVID more recently. And so that was something that was a real challenge for us. in terms of how do we engage community members and think creatively during this time of the pandemic when many things are closed down. So we had to innovate new ways of engaging people. We transformed a lot of our in-person activities and we went digital. We went into the virtual realm to make sure that people's thoughts and ideas were included in the process. We use videos, social media, for example, many other techniques. This is an example of a virtual open house that we did for the Charlotte 2040 plan. And it was a way for community members basically to have a workshop from the comfort of their home. And so at any point, they were able to engage with the content that we created to understand more deeply around the concepts of sustainability, of environmental access, of what is this comprehensive plan all about? And all of this was really helpful for people to engage during the time of the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's so important for us to rethink some of the questions that we ask of people and to consider the impacts. So who will benefit from this new planning process? Who will benefit from this downtown effort? Are there strategies that can mitigate intended and or unintended consequences? We want to be sure that there are shared benefits as well, and that community members of all stripes, of all walks of life, feel as though they have a stake in this downtown development, that they're going to benefit in the way of jobs, of investment, of economic opportunity, for example, as well as capital. So these are some of the strategies that we've used, everyone, to make sure that community members who exist and live within these adjacent neighborhoods and community members feel a part of downtown planning efforts. And I'm so excited now to introduce and pass the mic to my friend and colleague, Bill Dietrich. We had the great privilege of working with Bill and Ann on the Downtown KC plan, and we were able to live out a lot of these ideas and principles that I just shared with you. So with that, Bill, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jamil. I don't think your presentation, I think, really set the context. Can anyone see my screen? We good? Okay. Thank you for that presentation. It really sets the context for our experience in Kansas City. Thank you for all your efforts here. I couldn't have thought of a better introduction to kind of begin our presentation about really about an 18-month planning process we've been engaged in here in downtown Kansas City, which we call the Imagine Downtown KC 2030 Strategic Plan, which is this one here. The last strategic plan completed in downtown Kansas City was about 20 years ago, and it was called the Kansas City Downtown Corridor Development Strategy. Key word being corridor, north-south focus on the area of downtown's core districts. It was updated in 2005. It was a private sector plan that focused on prioritizing catalytic strategic projects. Several years later, the city of Kansas City did a greater area, downtown area plan. The difference is, if you think about the area plan, is really that document that tells people inside City Hall who interface with the development community and others, what the regulatory environment is, what the zoning codes are, what the city's kind of macro plans for infrastructure, for arterials, for stormwater, water separation, those things that really tell all the folks, great people inside City Hall, what those requirements are. Really kind of sets the table for development, where the downtown, what we call it, Imagine Downtown KC 2030 strategic plan is, again, looking at, if there's 10 things you can do, streetcar down to the Plaza UMKC, extending another 4 miles, downtown ballpark, losing the loop freeways, reconnecting neighborhoods, east-west mobility. How do you prioritize those? What's the market doing today? And what are the opportunities to affect catalytic change in our downtown? So hopefully these two plans then work rather seamlessly hand in glove. And I think we worked diligently as we set up our steering committee to make sure it was representative and inclusive of all the different stakeholders in downtown, including our city partners, like the director of planning, so we can make sure we had a good seamless interface. This is kind of a wide angle lens of our greater downtown area. It's about 2.8 square miles. The O2 plan really focused on saving the core, the central business district that's highlighted. At that point in time, in 02, we had 65,000 employees in downtown, and they were fleeing as quickly as they could to modern suburban alternatives. We had a modest number of residents in that area. We had hundreds of millions of dollars of deferred infrastructure, obsolete infrastructure, and over 40 blocks of really kind of the worst blighted, kind of urban blighted blocks, abandoned buildings, collapsed buildings, tons of surface parking lots. So 20 years later, out of that successful downtown core development strategy, pre-COVID, we had about $9.5 billion of investment in these core downtown neighborhoods. And we're looking at, on the north, the River Market, your central business district, to the west, Quality Hill, to the south, the Crossroads, to the east, the 18th and Vine Jazz District, and just south of that, the medical centers, where the Children's Mercy Hospital and Truman Medical Center and some innovation district is located, which were really kind of your core area of downtown. And within that, within these neighborhoods, again, you saw about $9.5 billion in investment in the last 20 years. We now have 123,000 employees, about 36,000 residents live in this area. Just pre-COVID, we had about 10 million convention visitors and regional visitors, kind of moving into a strong tier 2 tourism market. The plan was a great success. In fact, probably 4 or 5 years ago, ULI came to town to do a national tap, looking at, could we lose the North Loop Freeway, which we'll get into in a little bit. They came back and said, you got lots of real estate to develop before you worry about losing freeways. And by the way, your strategic plan is 20 years old, and you pretty much completed it all. And as we look around this room, this group of people does not look representative of the community at large in greater downtown. And you need to address those issues. And so we did. By starting this planning process. So that great transformation, that $9.5 billion of investment, 36,000 residents, 123,000 employees and growing, streetcars, really a transformational period in downtown Kansas City's history, benefited these core neighborhoods, but it did not benefit these downtown adjacent neighborhoods. They struggled with issues of gentrification, of displacement. When we looked at the core neighborhoods of downtown, your digital connection, Google Fiber here, is 98% of homes and businesses are connected to fiber. When we throw in the downtown adjacent neighborhood, that number drops down to about 60%. So we not only had a digital divide, a social divide, but we have a digital divide and physical divisions in downtown. So this new planning effort had to develop strategies based on principles of economic inclusion. It had to include neighborhood leaders and voices that weren't listened to before when we're looking at that core strategy 20 years ago, which focused clearly on those central downtown neighborhoods. Our downtown, as you can see here, we have about 19 unique neighborhoods, each one of these with a different character, a different personality, a different heritage. And that's what we celebrate in our city. We're actually blessed to have such diversity of neighborhoods in our greater downtown area, which, by the way, our study mirrors the city's greater downtown area plan boundaries. Inside these boundaries is predominantly commercial mixed use. Outside these boundaries is predominantly residential retail amenities. So there's a good kind of land use reason to call this greater downtown. But you can see it's a very diverse looking collection of neighborhoods with very diverse neighborhood leaders with different goals and strategies that had to be kind of woven together through this plan to create more of those kinds of connections that overcome the types of barriers and obstacles that Jamila was pointing out in her presentation. Our downtown is also divided by physical barriers. You can see the freeway system around downtown, which actually went through neighborhoods, separating neighborhoods from each other, and creating real physical barriers to downtown connectivity. Here's a great example of a freeway, a 6-lane freeway that cuts through between the River Market which is this neighborhood on the north by the river, and Columbus Park. You can see the freeway that goes right through there. You know, this is how it separates community. This we actually call the Berlin Wall. It's as you can see, it's a raised freeway. The embankments go on for about 6 blocks in each direction, completely separating these communities from each other. In addition to those physical barriers separating our neighborhoods in downtown, social and economic gaps continue. Kansas City has struggled and continues to struggle with systemic racism. Redlining and blockbusting were practically invented here. Racist housing policies with restrictive covenants segregated our city and our downtown. That racial dividing line really runs down a street here named Troost. To the west of Troost, the demographics of downtown is very mixed, very robust, very diverse. East of Troost, the demographic is 98% African American, and this was certainly done by design. This plan had to develop strategies to promote and enhance east-west connections. We had to reconnect the neighborhoods to the economic engine, that is the urban core. We need to break down both those physical barriers as well as these long-standing social and racial barriers that have limited communities' abilities to work together on strategic plans that help all neighborhoods around downtown. So we thought we would really begin to build out on our north-south freeway extension. This streetcar extension, right now the system is about 2 miles from City Market down to Union Station, right through the heart of those 3 core neighborhoods, River Market, Central Business District, and the Crossroads. It is currently being extended another 4 miles to connect to our University of Missouri-Kansas City down on the kind of a high-end shopping area and residential area called the Plaza, also adjacent to a lot of wonderful urban neighborhoods that are just south of that. Transit-oriented development a reality. Since we put this line in, there's been $2.5 billion within a block and a half either side of this line. And we talk to those developers constantly, and you know, but for the streetcar, or it weighed very heavily in their thinking, they wouldn't have looked at Kansas City for those kinds of investments, just a little side note. So it's also being extended down the north. You can see the extension is also going north to a riverboat casino, and then ultimately over the river to some north park and ride lots that we're working on. But the key is this gives us a great spine to build on. One of the things that we worked diligently with to create the streetcar was an economic model that enabled us, you know, it isn't free, but it's free to the public. So this streetcar has one of the highest riderships in the nation because we removed kind of all barriers to use. Did it through a transportation development district, an assessment on property, and a sales tax component. So we want to build on this spine, which will continue down another 4 miles, and really focus. This plan would really focus on these east-west connections. Through a lot of robust community engagement that Ann's going to walk us through, we identified key east-west corridors that suffered from all the challenges that we have with these east-west corridors, which are, you know, neglected infrastructures, busted up sidewalks or missing sidewalks, very low-grade transit stops that don't communicate to the customer that they're a valued customer and that we're giving you the premier system to connect you to jobs. And these were the major corridors that will come through our existing strategic plan that we'll be focusing on over the next decade. So again, we want to prioritize east-west connections. Bus rapid transit is bringing people, is it being expanded and bringing people connecting to the streetcar so we can make a seamless mobility system for all of our residents in the downtown adjacent neighborhoods. One of the things that we are been successful in the last 2 years, and part of this plan is how do we make this sustainable, is we've been able to expand on that streetcar model of coming up with a financial plan that enabled us to offer the service free to the public to our entire bus system. Think about that. So right now we have a free fare box for any rider in Kansas City on any of the bus systems and the BRT lines. This connects people to jobs. This makes jobs available to people that may not have been available to them before. For cost limitations, our system was not that inexpensive, and you add that along with more frequency. Suddenly, if I live at 18th and Vine Jazz District, a job in the Northland across the river becomes accessible to me, where before it may not have been. Or down the spine through Westport, the central business, or down to the Country Club Plaza. And finally, as we looked at these strategies, what really came through loud and clear for us is we needed to come up with quick wins and long-term wins that really focused on making sure that our downtown remains affordable for all of our citizens. We're very blessed in downtown Kansas City. Back in the early 2000s, we were able to use historic and low-income housing tax credits to rehab millions of square feet of obsolete Class C office buildings, beautiful historic buildings, but never getting to be used for office, into residential. Of our total residential housing base in greater downtown, about 18,000 units, about 2,500 of those units are rent restricted, so they're very affordable. And how do we build on this affordability? How do we, so we have a good base to start from, and how do we make sure we can continue to see the revitalization of downtown, the creation of new wealth within the downtown adjacent neighborhoods, with maintaining affordability and adding to that affordability? To build new affordable units is a pretty expensive strategy. So we've been looking at some ideas like the auxiliary dwelling units. Auxiliary dwelling units, I'm a single mom. I'm working on a $15 an hour job. I have a built-out basement or a built-out apartment over my garage. I own the home. I can't rent that out by ordinance. It must be, and we want that change. We want you to be able to offer those auxiliary dwelling units, which become immediate affordable units, to people, as well as help you create wealth within your family through your home ownership. We're talking about initiatives like creating social impact funds that enable community members to invest in retail and other amenities in their neighborhoods, really looking at that 10 to 15-minute walk circle. Each of these neighborhoods I showed you at the start should have all the amenities you have in your neighborhood, in each of those neighborhoods, from daycare to eliminating food deserts, free accessible transportation, growth in jobs. So we've reached out very through this process, Jamila and Jason Parsons' group here in Kansas City, to create a community engagement strategy that really reached out to all these neighborhoods around downtown to listen to them, to learn from them what are their priorities, what are their strategies, what's important, or how do they define success and growth in their neighborhood. So really, that first plan I showed you in 02 was a top-down plan, looking at the core, saving the core. What we've done 20 years later is really a grassroots plan that is talking to leaders, and residents, and employees in each of these neighborhoods. And by the way, as Jamil pointed out, in a COVID environment, we almost had to do all this virtually. And MIG and their team, our local team, and Holiday, who I'm going to hand this off to right now, just did an amazing job of creating a very robust community engagement program. And I'm going to hand it off now to you to kind of maybe run us through.
Great, thanks, Bill, and thank you for keeping my slides moving forward as well. Bill did a great job of kind of setting the stage about our Kansas City situation and effort, and Jamila as well. Their team was a great partner as we started this process. As Bill mentioned, we basically were planning our first event, our kickoff event, and we had to cancel it because the world shut down with COVID last March and April. We then went ahead and we made the decision that we were going to move forward with planning our project during this environment. So our immediate question was, well, how are we going to do that and really hit our engagement goals of working with new organizations that are new to us, right? It's a lot about relationship building for the Downtown Council. So the approach, you can see the kind of some of the elements. I'm going to actually talk through these different engagement tools that we use to connect with folks. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Bill. We started off where MIG went out and did stakeholder interviews without the downtown council present, so that we could get input from the institutions and organizations. Some of these are folks that were active with our downtown council organization, but most of them are not. They're different institutions that are operating in those adjacent neighborhoods. And so we wanted to hear from them, and without without Bill and I sitting there listening into every word. So that was one of our first efforts with communications. You can go to the next slide. Then we got to, okay, we're going to have our big steering committee meeting. How are we going to do that? I'm sure many of you have been in this situation, and over the past year figured out that there are all these great new tools. And we were really thrilled because this steering committee, but after that we had our first public community meeting. We had over 200 people come online. I really don't think we would have had that many people if we had to do it in person. So next slide, please. A really key element for us was what we call these community conversations. So we identified, again, back to some of those key organizations, neighborhood organizations, the Black Chamber of Commerce, as you can see, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And we sat down in these small groups and let them tell us what they thought about downtown, what they thought about the downtown council, and then we got to how we could move forward together. And that was definitely a great listening opportunity for us, because issues from the past don't really go away, that they're always there, and you do, like Jamila mentioned earlier, acknowledge the past and have that conversation before you can start to move forward. So next slide, please. Oh, here's some of the findings that came out of that. You can related to development and business opportunities. People were like, we need more equitable access to capital. We want you to avoid, Bill mentioned top-down planning. We were trying to engage the neighborhoods as early as we could. We started talking about community benefit agreements, racial wealth building, inclusive procurement. I mean, these are all ideas that we wanted to start to understand and include as part of our process from the beginning. And then I think this was really interesting, the very last bullet in Kansas City, it lists this idea of how can you kind of unbundle development projects so that your small local businesses, maybe women owned, maybe minority owned, could take part in that and grow their business so they might be eligible for another bigger project later. Next slide, please. Some additional findings are obviously around COVID-19. How are we going to reactivate and keep our businesses alive? And then this homelessness crisis definitely hit Kansas City, and that's like probably an entirely separate webinar to talk about that. And then it was a good opportunity to really understand if we wanted to connect from the core of downtown to these neighborhoods. Well, how do the neighborhoods want to connect, or how do these other commercial districts like 18th and Vine? Let's not just look at past plans, but let's really understand where we are. And then another major part of this effort was working on, how do we understand just gentrification and displacement, and how will we move forward without displacing people as we grow? And we're working on that. That's a challenging effort, to be sure. So next slide, please. Another tool that we used to engage with folks was, it was a lot of fun and it was very interesting, but we created this downtown podcast series. And we had a local young sort of celebrity-esque kind of person, Kemet Coleman, who's a musician and an urban planner, and now I understand property owner and developer. So if you'll go to the next slide, he hosted this series that we, there we go. So now here you can get an idea, I think, of the different types of people that came on and really talked about what their vision for downtown Kansas City was. And it was kind of a great opportunity to capture their thoughts, and we pushed it out in a variety of different places so we could get some additional communications going with the community. Next slide, please. The kind of final, maybe more individualized type activity that we did were these focus group meetings, which we were able to do online. So I think we had 6 or 7 different meetings on each of the topics you see in front of you. And for those, we'd had maybe 10 to 20 people from all over downtown, and we had incredible discussions through those. And I found it interesting. I feel like through much of this process, we actually got more attendees because we were doing it online at that point. I don't know how that's going to work in the future, but I think folks that may have felt maybe a little challenged, didn't want to deal with parking in the center of downtown and all that, it was a little bit more like we could go to them by being online. So, but that's a way we got a lot of great input. So next slide, please. Then as the plan was developing and we had the vision statement, we had our sort of draft goals and strategic projects and strategies. Then we took those out and we kept doing presentations and conversations with all of the adjacent neighborhoods, as well as our civic groups, the Chamber of Commerce, the Civic Council, and our political friends at the City Council. So, that was another layer of input and back and forth that we really tried to keep up that back and forth discussion throughout the entire process. Next slide, please. So then, we've gathered all the input. We're nearing the finish line, and these next round of slides are a little bit to show you where we're at and how we're going to try to keep that community engagement going as we move to implementation. So this is actually a snapshot from part of the plan, which is our implementation matrix. And this is under a strategy around seamless east-west connections, one of our key points that Bill brought up earlier, specifically about one recommendation, the Paseo Gateway connection. So that's a specific area here. We list the recommendations. The next section, we try to identify, well, who's responsible for this, who can drive this forward with our help, because we've always viewed this as a downtown council managed effort, but we want it to be a community-wide process. And then you can see we have our time frame. So this is going to be the tool that kind of our implementation committee and the work groups we set up under that to take the recommendations forward and implement. So next slide, please.
Trying.
And then another piece of that implementation will be looking at our 5 goal areas. We have a series of metrics connected with each of those that the implementation committee will be able to look at quarterly. Well, they won't. They'll look at it annually to see, are we meeting our goals? And in Kansas City, this has been a great opportunity for us to connect with other major civic efforts and organizations so that we're all kind of using similar criteria and ours. If you see the data source, KC Rising, the city, the streetcar, we're trying to really work together with other plans and efforts going on. So next slide. We already have a metrics dashboard. You can find it at downtownkc.org. And this will be an online tool then that the public can see to look at not only the data we have now that basically describes downtown, but all these new metrics that will show whether we're being successful as we implement the plan. Next slide. Few details about how we're planning to set up our implementation committee. That's where we're at right now. Is we've literally just had our last steering committee meeting. We're finalizing the written report, and we're creating this implementation committee, which I think the purposes that you see listed there are fairly straightforward. We are really focusing right now on this committee formation process and how we can ensure continue to have diversity and inclusion as we did with our original process. Next slide, please. This is a big deal for us in downtown Kansas City, that as we create that committee and the things related to it, we always want an equal balance of members of the community, the business sector, and then government and civic partners. I would say, I believe in my bio, you heard that I've been here a long time. And I would say maybe a few decades ago, that Blues community section was either a lot smaller or it wasn't there at all. So, you know, that this is where we're going, and we're excited to be doing that. Next slide, please. And yeah, I'm not going to really go through this, but this starts to show you how we have a steering committee that will focus at the vision element and goal levels to make sure we're moving those forward. And then we have transformative strategies and catalytic projects. Those will be headed they'll either be liaisons that are connecting us with ongoing efforts, or we'll be creating new work groups. But what I do want to kind of draw your attention to is in the middle of the screen, we're working on this idea of a community engagement work group that would be constantly working to help us maintain and improve our relationships with our neighboring adjacent neighborhoods that are all part of downtown, actually, as well as the larger public. So next slide, I think, is the end almost. The other thing I wanted just to kind of throw out so you know where our thinking is, but we're working right now on creating an ongoing communications plan that will go along with implementation, that we see as having kind of three pieces. One, pre-media communications, you know, how are we going to roll this out to our stakeholders, our partner organizations? And by stakeholders, I'm again talking about the businesses, the civic community, those neighborhood groups, the churches, et cetera. So after we do that, then we'll be looking at our public media campaign and holding a launch event, and then also an ongoing community engagement and public relations plan, which again, we think that'll be really, really important. So hope I've laid out some of the specifics of what we're working on, and I'm done.
Hey, Ann, I would only add that great presentation, that we created a website, imaginedowntownkc.org, and everything we did, we post on the website. We have a pretty robust social media kind of network, and so constantly we were pushing out surveys to the general population, just trying to get information from even parts of the city that weren't downtown. But you know, if you live in a residential neighborhood 5 miles south, why do you come downtown? You know, what's important to you? And so I thought as using that kind of that social media network really helped us gather information from, you know, broad, diverse group of stakeholders normally you don't talk to in a kind of strategic planning process like this. But we felt it was important.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Bill.
Oh, thank you, Ann.
Wow. Thank you all. What an amazing story to hear, like where you were 20 years ago and where you're going now into the future. And I just commend you. What just amazing work. One question I had was, how do you know when you've done enough community engagement? Is there any way to measure that?
Wow, that's a great question, Carolyn. That's something that we're often asked, you know, by clients, by communities. When is it enough? And some would argue that it's never enough, that it's about ongoing engagement. And I think that's what Ann just touched on with this community engagement work group, is that you definitely want to have it baked and built into the process. But what happens after that? Sometimes communities feel like you've essentially used me for my input, and then you go away and you do the process, and I have to kind of be on my own to find out what happened next. How can I stay involved? And so I think it's really important to underscore this ongoing, continual engagement with communities, that we don't want your input just for this one process, but it's about building long-term relationships with community members, community leaders, so that it's this process and beyond, so that we're not always starting from scratch when we want to go back out and re-engage community members. But I'm sure Bill and Ann might have some other thoughts as well.
Couldn't have said it better. But one of the things, in addition to that, one of the things we are doing is, and we think it's really critically important, and we had a great experience doing it with the Greater Downtown Area Plan about a decade ago, which is, I think Nan touched on, is the establishment of an implementation committee. So once the plan is done, we very intentionally, a great tool that we developed, we use a matrix that really makes sure that we're having representatives from each neighborhood, from each stakeholder group, from each community organization on an implementation committee that meets quarterly. Under that implementation committee, you'll have a series of working committees that are, they're advancing the auxiliary dwelling unit ordinance change issue, or a catalytic project like lidding the I-670 freeway. And those work groups will report back quarterly to that implementation committee, which uses the metrics to measure, are we making progress, identifying obstacles, what initiatives are going well, which ones are, which ones do we need to focus on, which ones are the market supporting. So I think the word intentionality can't be used enough, and it takes energy, and you have to be very proactive to ensure that those partners stay at the table. And I think what we're committed to is, if you lose a partner off the table, is to make sure that you do the outreach to keep that neighborhood and community engaged. I think if you don't do an implementation strategy, an implementation committee, these plans can often just end up on shelves. And it's a great plan, but no one's responsible. So I think we see the Downtown Council as the facilitator, and the fiduciary, the metrics, the kind of management program implementation partner to the greater downtown area. But as Ann pointed out, you really need to keep all those organizations engaged, active, advancing their plans, and understanding how can we help leverage those plans, how can we help accelerate the development of them. So I couldn't agree with you more, Julia. It never ends, community engagement. It's probably the core of this plan, is building connections, building bridges, relationships where they weren't before.
Great, great. That's just so impressive. And to talk about being intentional, I think that's so important. And we've got a couple other questions coming in, and I just want to remind people, if you have a question, please type it in the chat, and we'll get to it. And if we don't, we'll have our speakers answer it, and we'll send a follow-up email on Monday. But I've heard from Claude Imbeau from San Francisco. And his question is, what specific actions did the speakers take to align neighborhood downtown priorities with neighborhood priorities?
Well, I can start, Bill. Or you want to start, Bill?
Go ahead, Jamila. I'll follow your lead.
Okay, great. Well, there's so much knowledge and experience on this panel here, so we probably all have lots to say on this one and all the other questions. But to the question, I think that one of the things that's so important, I think, is listening humbly to community members, to community organizations, around what are their priorities, what are their planning processes, and how can we dovetail and weave those priorities into, for this case, the downtown KC planning effort. So it's about aligning where we see their similarities, where we see their synergies in terms of priorities, and also understanding that there might be some chasms in terms of what we want to accomplish. And so how can we work together to build that consensus around how this planning process can support, uplift, and augment whatever it is that they have going on. So I think that's a really important piece, in addition to what are the community benefits that are created by the downtown planning efforts. How can the community leverage this planning process for the greater good of what they hope to accomplish? Is it economic justice and inclusion? Is it more parks and recreation amenities? Is it more lively downtowns that connect communities from different cultures? Whatever it may be, I think that it's about listening, it's about that ongoing communication and identifying those synergies. And I'll pass it to Bill and Ann.
I might just add something we've really learned along the way too, which we are working on that, aligning the efforts, but what we're finding are some of our adjacent neighborhoods don't have their goals laid out. There's disagreement in the ranks, or their plan is also 20 years old. They don't have a new plan. So we've already been having conversations about, how do we meet regularly with those neighborhoods and try to boost their resources or help connect them with people who can, help them have more of a voice of their own.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I have another question from Karen Iverson. I'm not sure where she's from, but I think it's a two-part question. How do you ensure affordable single-family home ownership opportunities? Do you want to?
one more time, please.
How do you ensure affordable single-family home ownership opportunities? I think in your presentation, Bill, you were talking about affordable housing and making
No, exactly right. I think it's a balancing act. When you look at the kind of core urban neighborhoods like the River Market, CBD, Crossroads, housing value, and we do have about 2,500 units of affordable housing in them, but those are multifamily kind of areas. Real estate's more expensive, construction more expensive, have structured parking, therefore rents are higher. We are blessed and cursed with a wonderful inventory of single family homes that wrap around those core neighborhoods in downtown. And we have seen on the west side, these are beautiful, like, turn of the century Victorians and a lot of really, really wonderful housing stock. On the west side, there's a lot of, there's been a lot of investment, a lot of rehabilitation of those homes. But you've seen, and it's kind of two-way street here. You've seen some gentrification in areas. There wasn't a lot of displacement because these buildings had been empty for a generation. So, but definitely the price point's going up. And if I were a working middle class family, it'd be hard for me to afford some of those single family homes. But we have other areas that are kind of historic and traditional, like Columbus Park, which has a really nice inventory of very affordable homes. And on the east side, when we come down, there's actually a really healthy inventory of again, gosh, and what you say, 1930s, 40s, 50s kind of homes that line up and down the Paseo Boulevard and some really lovely kind of traditional neighborhoods that are available because of some of the negative issues that Jamila touched on, kind of with the kind of racial segregation. These property values have been forcefully devalued. So there's real opportunities and we're seeing it start to happen, to acquire these homes, and whether it's through a company that does 5 or 6 homes at a time, cities or the city working on a land trust to get these into single kind of ownership so they can be rehabilitated. We have a really healthy stock to work with, and I just end by that intentional kind of comment again is we're working right now, and through this planning process, we've identified community investment funds, social investment funds, the auxiliary dwelling unit kind of issue, making those available, and working with the city on a land trust, which gets these properties into ownership that they can be rehabilitated. And that's where the future is for that. I mean, this is when we talk about helping create wealth and helping create ownership in the downtown adjacent neighborhoods, that's exactly the opportunities to focus really specifically on rehabilitating the great great inventory of housing that we have, while not making them unaffordable.
Right.
And there are some strategies we've identified. Well, kind of just talked to them already, but that I think how to approach that.
Okay, and Carol Hunter posted a question. Did a fear of gentrification make any downtown adjacent neighborhoods reluctant to explore efforts to reconnect them to the core?
Anne, you want to tackle that?
Yes.
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. And yeah, we were actually simultaneously with this project doing another planning project, which would entail bringing down the highway between 2 neighborhoods of downtown. And we, basically we had lots of conversations, and there are more conversations to be had with the one neighborhood that felt like the freeway actually protected them. And they don't want new growth because what they've seen is not the kind of new growth they want. And they're yeah. So I guess we're working through that. And I think we'll get to a place where that community benefit type of agreement is going to be really important, so that we have almost a piece of paper that says, okay, well, here is what the community wants, and that there's some agreement on that. That's part of the issue that I see on that particular neighborhood side, is the people in that area don't actually agree. So how are we going to get them, to kind of come to a place of agreement? with them amongst themselves, and then that we can then be working together to say, look, okay, well, how is this beneficial to downtown, to the whole city? I'm not sure I answered that too well, but.
Great
Yep.
answer.
Yeah,
Great
no,
answer.
it's doing good. I have one more question if people want to hang on, because this is such an important topic and discussion. And Karen Iverson had asked this, that all three of the panelists have mentioned community access to capital. Have you found an innovative way to expand access to capital for people who live greater downtowns, not just those that own businesses? How did the community envision leveraging this type of capital?
Well, Bill, there's, I know specifically one of the tools that's started being used here in Kansas City. It's the Social Impact Fund. So this is something that's just beginning here, where people in the neighborhood can basically have a share, like buy a small share, maybe it's $10 or $1 a month kind of thing, where they can then invest in a new retail or small business that's taking place. So they don't themselves have to be the business owner, but they can make that investment.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'd also, yes, and I'd add to that. And another thing is, and you touched on it, and it can be, I think, overstressed, which is these community benefit agreements, which just haven't existed here at all. And this, we're working right now with the city, looking at, we have a pretty robust incentive policy to, rents our construction costs. So we use things like tax increment financing and tax abatement. And these tools are all very controversial. And they should be. I mean, they need to be really well examined. Does the developer need the incentive to go forward with the project? In the urban core, when you're talking about structured parking, that's a pretty good argument. You can make economically for it. But I come from Seattle many years ago, and there we had a pretty good benefit system of the city had a policy which really aligned their neighborhood goals, align the public goals with their incentive policies. So it'd be, gee, if you want to go 5 stories higher than the zoning allows, transfer the development rights of a parcel you own so we can do affordable housing on it. And so the public gets a benefit for that incentive more than just the project. And we're at the very front end of that kind of thinking, but we're starting to get a little traction through this process and with the city to start thinking about, can we align with the city's the resources the city has to promote outcomes it wants to see while enabling development to go ahead and come in. So it's a community benefit program, which is, again, being thoughtful, being, if we talk about the land trust, if the goal is, hey, let's rehab 50 of these homes and make them come in at, $50,000 a home for a family of 4. Okay, I'm a developer, I want to do X over here. How can I help feed that land trust to make that happen? But Anne's right, it's all trust building. We're really at the very front end of these ideas here. Yeah. They're pretty novel to Kansas City.
Yeah,
and Carolyn, just last but not least, I would be remiss not to jump in on this one and just say that, in addition to what Bill and Ann mentioned, I think that it's really encouraging cities to take a closer look at their policies around inclusive procurement, around inclusion and equity, such as MBE, WBE type programs, access to capital via pilots. I think that sometimes we often feel that we need such a huge amount, but instead there can be smaller interventions, pilot interventions, in which communities and certain stakeholders, leaders are given access to capital on that pilot basis, and to demonstrate impact, to demonstrate results that can then be scaled up for other entrepreneurs, for other partners within disinvested communities. So I think those are a couple of other ideas I wanted to mention.
That's really great, Jamila. And I almost see another webinar on that, maybe, that what are some of those pilot projects that you can do to spur this whole thing. So that's really, really a great idea. Wow, what an amazing webinar today, Bill and Jamila. I can't thank you enough. A shout out to Kate Jonkis in the background that worked with all of us from MIG as well. And I hope to see all 3 of you at the annual conference in Tampa, possibly, so we can continue this conversation, because it's an important one, and I know that we could really keep going. And don't forget, today's webinar is you can receive, if you're a certified planner with the American Planning Association, you can receive 1 credit. And also this webinar is being recorded. So if you found it valuable, please make to share, share to your other IDA members how great it was. Also want to remind you again, Tampa is coming up October 20th to the 22nd. We hope to see you there. Next week, we'll be taking Friday off, July 1st, for the holiday weekend, but we'll be returning on July 9th, and we're going to be talking about holiday and winter place activations. And it's a good time to start thinking about the holidays and get your planning together. And then the Friday after that, on July 16th, we'll be reconvening talking community conversation around public space management and operations. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for hanging in there. And again, thank you to our amazing speakers, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Great job, Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Like, how do I get out of here?